just want to. I write. Say welcome everybody. Some of you I know well, others I've never met before, but it's such a pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. This is what life is all about. It's what I missed so terribly in the first 3 months of lockdown. I think actually we're all in a collective state of mourning for various reasons. I think we've all lost something in this period. I lay in awake for 3 nights thinking about what I was going to say, and it actually made me very emotional. After I emerged from my potting shed where I propagate all my plants and decided to reconvene my environment group talks on Zoom, I started writing newsletters from May 2020. And I've covered absolutely everything about the pandemic. I've read thousands and thousands of words, and I've written thousands and thousands of words. It's actually been a tragedy. It's an attack on humanity and on humankind and our humanity, because human beings need to gather together. They need touch. They need contact with other human beings, and it's been a deliberate attempt to isolate and divide us. I think all of us here have lost friends, even our family. I'm so grateful to have brought up 2 independent thinkers, because it's brought my sons and me closer together. We're in a 3-way iMessage conversation, and there are about 20 messages every day. A lot of what I read comes from them. And yet my best friend in the UK has cut me off, first on WhatsApp, now on email. She said, no one in the UK is interested in what a South African housewife who thinks she's a scientist has to say. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I think it's been an eye-opener. I keep repeating thinking of Leslie Gore's 80s song, It's My Party and I Can Cry If I Want to. What Professor Martin Kaldorf said, he said that the pandemic has exposed the true character of people. It's been both fascinating and stunning to watch. And this is the thing I can't get over. You know, since time immemorial, life on Earth has been a Game of Thrones, a power struggle. But that goes without saying. Always follow the money. But what has been so traumatic for me is my fellow human beings. I've got this one meme here I printed out, which says, there's so many things here. I can find it now. How my fellow human beings accepted, people who talk about the Holocaust, who talk about this woman who's just been elected in Italy, Giorgia Meloni, as a right-wing alt-fascist. And yet they put up with this othering of the unvaccinated. They thought it was fine that we could be vilified, prevented. I couldn't play bridge at the club. In fact, my good friend here and fellow gardener, husband is the bridge club director, and I wrote to him and I said, how can you say you need to show a vax certificate to go and play bridge at the club when you're living with an unvaccinated person? He said, I have to do it, otherwise no one will come. Anyway, now I'm going on Wednesday for the first time. Reluctantly, because I feel, I don't know. But the whole thing is so ridiculous. There were moments in in the lockdown that people who really were a lifesaver to me. Where's my neighbour's hiding behind there? Dan, 21-year-old Dan, my neighbour's son next door, has been my ranting partner since the beginning. I hope you've been spreading the word amongst his parents were sort of dubious at first, but I think they've gone over to the dark side now. And where's Maira?
Me.
Oh, there she is. My lovely Brazilian friend Maira, who stayed in our cottage for 6 weeks when she works for the Brazilian consulate, and she was in a 5-year rotation from Geneva. She came here before she rented a house with her daughter who goes to a Waldorf school. I'm allowed to say, Maira has never had any of the childhood vaccines. Look at her.
Wow.
You too. You too. Really, never been vaccinated. And I remember going to the Emporium up the road one day and feeling so despondent because things happened like a couple of our oldest friends, we went walking with them, and we came back here and Desmond put his arms around her at the back and gave her a hug, and she turned on him in such a state and flung a handbag at him and said, "My brother will never speak to me again because his wife has had cancer and blah, blah, blah." And they refused to come into our home. And so many others refused to come into our home. It was just horrifying. So anyway, I was up at the Emporium and I came out and I saw Maira and I was in such a state. I burst out crying and Maira put her arms around me and gave me a hug. And that was it was a moment I'll never forget because this is what they've done to us. I think most people are suffering, besides the cognitive dissonance, they're suffering from mental anxiety. It's unforgivable, actually. And everybody, I printed this out because it's so ridiculous. Jill and I both love gardening. Garden was my lifesaver. But these criminals putting out all these messages, green fingers, urgent warning to gardeners as soil increases the risk of killer heart attack in the sun. I mean, they're trying every reason. I mean, the number of heart attacks amongst young people is on the rise, and shaking the duvet cover can give you a heart attack. I mean, it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic, actually. It says here, and of course the word expert in this article is mentioned many times, and I'd love to know who these experts and their handlers. Experts. The analysis pushed experts to recommend that people wear face masks if they are in close contact with the soil. I mean, honestly, every list of things to do as you get older, there's a woman my sort of age here gardening, gardening's good for the body and soul. When I've been in the garden all day, at the end of the day I feel much more exercise than if I've been to the gym. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, I could go on and on. Most people here have read all the stuff I've read. We're all mostly like-minded here, but what has happened is a travesty, and the most frustrating part and the saddest part is that there's so many people who just won't open their minds and listen, who won't talk to you, who cut you off. My own sister in Queensland, Uzbekistan. We know a lot of intelligent people. None of them think like you. Well, my answer is they're obviously not thinking. She says, we're following the science. She's got a master's degree, her husband's got a PhD, but she said, don't send me this stuff because it's affecting our relationship. We've got someone else here whose sister is a doctor, and mother and sister both having the 4th jab, and sister says, when our mother dies, I won't speak to you again. This sort of stuff. It's terrible, absolutely terrible. I'll never forgive the perpetrators for what they've done to us. Anyway, I could go on all day, but do you want to really, you really want to hear from our guest of honor tonight? Nick needs no introduction to, but and of course Tim over there. Tim went through the whole thing in 2014. You know what it's like to go. Oh, I must tell you about my GP. My GP, when I asked for a script for ivermectin, he sent me this very patronizing email with a PDF, one straight from Pfizer, safe and effective, even for pregnant women, the whole spiel. And then ivermectin, risky and ineffective. So, and he sent a CC to 2 members of the Medicross practice where he works. We always thought he was a lateral thinker, but obviously not. I took umbrage at that, so he started on the wrong person. I bombarded him and the 2 others with every bit of information, non-stop. Eventually, we were in the UK. I got this email from him saying, "Dear Linda, I can understand why you're so upset by the way the pandemic's been handled. I will do more reading." So that was really, I thought, quite an achievement. I also went to see a specialist because I have sun lesions and things, and I said to him, I started on the verboten topic anyway. He said, "Never heard of Dr. Robert Malone. He's a charlatan like all the rest. Peri and myocarditis are a figment of the imagination. All the vaccines have been fully tested and they're marvelous. I've seen someone who's had a child that's had polio, but he's had 2 jabs and COVID twice. I mean, would you expect a child to get polio after 1 jab, never mind 2 jabs? Anyway, his reception staff who all seemed to agree with what I said, because I ran to everywhere. I asked my husband, his favorite quip to everyone is, "I need to take her batteries out." They said, "He hasn't got time to read." Now I ask you, a doctor hasn't got time to read. It's quite unbelievable, but I mean, don't have to tell Tim this. Anyway, I think we should first of all, I don't think I've got any wine there, but before they even start, I'd like to, just one last thing. In my normal speech at my 70th birthday, I mentioned Professor Brené Brown. Yes. Brené Brown, who talks about the power of vulnerability. I think that's what is missing in a lot of people. So few people have the ability to stand alone, to be so true to themselves, that they have the strength and oh, thank you. You got one. And I think these 2 gentlemen here have that in spades. I mean, Tim went through that all in 2014, coming up against the medical fraternity. And I can only now understand what you must have been through. And I've said to all my friends who suffered under apartheid, it's only now that my own liberties have been taken away that I fully understand what it must be like. Because for nearly 70 years, everything went swimmingly in my life. Everything went according to plan, and I was stopped in my tracks. And I thought, but as I said before, the thing that amazed me most of all, you'd expect that from corrupt politicians, the people who stand to gain the most financially from this, but you don't expect your fellow human beings to accept what's happened to us. And then the worst thing is why I wanted Nick to speak about the way forward is that what I get from people now is, well, it's all over now, I don't want to talk about it. That's old hat. We had our vaccinations, and because of the vaccinations, they obviously think that's what solved the problem. The day the masks came off, was such a day of celebration for me that most people just took it for granted, but they didn't realize that it was a struggle by a lot of activists and civic organizations, and threat of court cases that the government relented. It wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. And it could all happen again. There's big signs up in London on poles saying, stand 2 meters apart, 6'6", are still there. They haven't been taken away.
Floor arrows.
I wonder if they're going to try it again. Anyway, I think, would you like to say something, and then people can ask you questions? And Tim?
Yeah, let me start, because then you go to finish.
Guys, I have some wine to top up if anyone's empty.
There you go.
Wine.
So listening to your talk, Linda, you made a couple of comments which resonated with me. So firstly, it's a miracle that I'm here. There are two things that should have killed me. The first was that I developed type 2 diabetes of my own without realizing it, and I had to overcome that. My dad had diabetes for 10 years and died. I've had it for 12 years and I'm still alive. So I shouldn't be. And the second thing was my trial, and I only got through it because of Marilyn and her support. Because what these people do is they try to break you from the only person who remains, which is your wife. They take everyone else away. And if they do that, the only outcome is suicide. So if she had left me, I would not be here today.
Oh,
That's what they try to do. So I'm a scientist. Although I was accused of being a medical doctor, that was never my interest. And the question is, well, what's science? And what is a scientist? And science, please, is not a body of knowledge. You cannot follow science. That's not the way it is. You can follow a technique, which is the scientific technique. And the scientific technique is the main function is to disprove evidence. It is to disprove. That's what it is. It's not to prove. Now, I've had an amazing career, and it's built on disproof, because I've disproved a whole bunch of things. One of the disproofs we've just published, or about to publish, is one I've worked on for 50 years. And if you are an athlete, you will know that when you exercise, you must have carbohydrates. That is absolutely critical. So if you read my book, Law of Running, you will see it says, you must load up, you must eat kilograms of carbohydrates in the days before the Comrades Marathon, and that's the only way you'll survive. And that is totally, utterly, completely wrong. And I've killed people with that advice. And I've almost killed myself with that advice. So the only way you can do that is to test the opposite. But no one does it. No one does it. No one says, well, actually, if you don't eat that, how will you perform? So with a group in Philadelphia, beginning about 5 years ago, we started to test it. So we had people eat a high-fat diet, not a high-carbohydrate diet, and then they would go from the high-fat diet to the high-carbohydrate diet. And guess what? Performance was identical, nothing different. More recently, we had the race over 1 mile. Now, anyone will tell you, a mile, that's high intensity, you've got to burn all this carbohydrate. No difference in performance, but we did one other thing. The textbook says that when you're running at 85% of your maximum, you can only burn carbohydrates. You cannot burn 1 gram of fat, 1 molecule of fat. In the most recent experiment, we had people exercise and run 800 meters 6 times, and we measured what their metabolism was. They were running at 85% of maximum. Remember what I just told you? At 85% of maximum, you cannot burn fat. We measured the highest rates of fat oxidation ever measured in humans on this planet when they were running 85% VO2 max. So it completely disproves everything. So unfortunately, my book, Law of Running, is now history. That advice is wrong all the time. So my point is that you must disprove everything. When you look at a science like virology, you have to ask the question, is it a science? Is it a member of the empirical sciences? For example, religion is not an empirical science. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means you can't test it. We cannot prove whether God exists. So therefore, it doesn't belong to the empirical sciences. That doesn't mean it's wrong. And I don't believe it's wrong. I believe very strongly in religion, very strongly in God and all those and the importance of God in our society. I believe very strongly in that. But it's not science, it's belief. So what you have to do is you have to look at which parts of science are belief systems. And virology is 100% a belief system. It's 100% a belief system. There is not one study which they look at their hypothesis. So their hypothesis is that you have this virus which can grow inside the human body and cause illness, and then it can be transmittable. Now that may be true. I'm not saying it's not true, but it's not proven, and it's not disproven. They've never tested those hypotheses. In fact, there are individual studies which suggest that some of that hypothesis is wrong. For example, the Spanish flu, which killed 40 million or 400 million, or whatever it was, million people. Sorry?
No, I said I think about
50 million people. They tried, there was a doctor in New York who took the soldiers who had the disease, and he had other soldiers in the same room, sleep with them, to be in close contact. They could not transmit whatever was causing this infection. They could not transmit it. So, but no one considers that. They just ignore that. So again, I'm not saying that the hypothesis is wrong, but they never test it. That's point one. And point two, they never run controls. And in science, you have to have a control condition. If you don't have a control condition, you don't know what they're doing. So the way they prove that there's a virus is that they take sample from a human being, and this has happened in Wuhan. They went to one patient in Wuhan, and they sucked out some stuff from his lungs, and then they grow it on a range of cells. And then they take a mix of this and they expose other cells and see whether the cells die or not. And if the cells die, they say, you see there's a virus present. But that's not true. You don't, because it's all based on the hypothesis that there is a virus present, we've isolated, and that's what's causing killing these cells. And that is not science. You have to isolate the thing from everything else. If it were true, if viruses were true, and if corona was caused by a virus, the easiest proof would be that you had lung cells. You could take a sample from all these people, because remember we told we're highly infectious. Remember that? That means you must have millions of copies of this virus floating around. So what you do is you suck out the sample and then you grow it on lung cells, because that's where it grows in the human body. But what they say is, no, these viruses are very tricky to grow. But then why do they grow so easily in human cells, in human lung cells, if you can't grow them outside the body? So again, I'm not saying it's not true. What I'm saying is not being disproven. It's not that no one's bothered to test it. So those are some of the arguments. And let's get back to the problem in medicine. Who does medicine? Well, your parents want you to do medicine, for a start. And secondly, you have a good memory. That's all you need to get into medicine. Because then you memorize and you pass exams, and then everyone thinks you're a hell of a clever. What I discovered was the two people who I thought were the cleverest, who trained me, both had photographic memories. And that's why they stood out. And if you go to any professor of medicine that I've ever met, they all have a photographic memory. And the problem with the photographic memory is got no creativity, none at all. And it's very unusual to find someone who's got that type of memory and is creative. So what happens is you get into medicine and you can learn everything. And that's fantastic. So you learn it all and it's easy. But there's no creativity and you don't have to question. Here's a textbook. So when we get criticized, it's, but the experts said it. But no, hold on, you must work out whether this is true or not. And that's what's not done. And we're not taught that in medicine. But in science, we are taught. We're taught to question. But medicine is not science. It's not science. It's learning to regurgitate knowledge. So the people who drove the coronavirus story, and Nick may well refer to this, the people who put us where we are in South Africa, they're not creative people. They're not thinkers. They don't question. They did it because they were being paid to do it. And that's the reality. Yeah.